Hi there, welcome to the Style Sessions. I'm Roger Mittag. I'll be your host. I'm not sure, I think we've covered roughly 30 different beer styles now. And now we're going to venture into North American specific styles, and that is the West Coast IPA. So I've got lots to tell you today. So a little bit of a story. We'll talk about the tasting attributes and the characteristics of the IPAs, but first I want to start off with this glass. And I'll show you a little bit more once we actually pour into the glass. So the glass I'm using is called the Spiegelau IPA glass. And this glass, not even sure how long, maybe 6, 8, 10 years ago, this glass was developed by the Spiegelau Glassware Company in conjunction with Boston Beer Company, Sierra Nevada, and Dogfish Head. And they all came up with this glass idea and then posted it, basically saying it was the best glass for IPAs. And there's a skeptic in me that when someone says something is the best, is it really? So I had my doubts, but I am going to tell you, hands down, I've done lots of tests with this beer, with consumers, with a variety of different people. This is hands down the best IPA glass. It is beautifully shaped and sculpted. There's a lot of really cool things about it. At the bottom of the glass, it's very narrow. So at the bottom of the glass, because it's so narrow, it's really going to fire a lot of carbon dioxide, so the CO2 is going to be very, very active. And then on top of that, there's these little bumps and grooves along the side, these design characteristics. And what that does is it creates nucleation points. And nucleation points are where the CO2 hits different surface area and then fires a little bit more actively. So this whole base is about designing a beer that's going to be thirst quenching and easier to drink. And with an IPA, you definitely need that. Then it opens up into the body of the beer. And the body of this glass is a little bit wider. And what the body of the glass being wider does is it slows the carbon dioxide down. So we've got all this thirst quenching characteristics coming out already. But what this is going to do is bring out some of the malt profile. So what we're looking for this part of the glass to do is drive a little bit more sweetness to the consumer and therefore removing some of the bitterness. The other thing about the CO2, if this beer its CO2 is more active, it is going to create a crisper, cleaner finish to it, and it's not going to have the same length of aftertaste that you would normally associate with IPAs. And then the last thing is that the glass is tapered up inward toward the mouth of the glass, and this is to keep that really nice, big, thick, frothy foam all there. And IPAs are not very complex beers, but they do have these really vibrant aromas, and we want to focus those all at the top of the glass so that you as a beer drinker can really appreciate them. So let me pour it for you. Beer I'm using today is Fat Tug from Driftwood Brewing on Vancouver Island. This is one of my favorite West Coast IPAs. First of all, it's from the West Coast, and secondly, it is still really true to style on what this was when it was first created. So let me pour it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the story. So I want to be a little gentle at first because that narrow base could actually open up and create a little bit more foam than I actually want. And there we are. Perfect. Let's make sure that's facing. All right, so we've got this beautiful beer in front of me. It is golden in color, maybe even a light peach color, hints of mango. It's got a really big, frothy white foam. From a clarity perspective, West Coast IPAs are either going to be clear or slightly hazy, but not that thick, rich, dense haze that we see, or the cloudiness that we see in hazy IPAs or Vermont, New England IPAs, which we'll talk about next session. So great beer to look at. You can see how the glass just does everything that I told you it was going to do. It's got lots of effervescence in there. And when you go to smell, the big thing about West Coast IPAs is that the aromatics are really driven by two major things, and that is citrus and pine. So normally the citrus that you're going to get is going to be pink grapefruit pith, so the inside white part of the grapefruit itself. So it's got a little bit more vibrant aromatic. And then the pine could be anywhere from pine needles to pine resin. If it's more resinous, it might have some characteristics of being dank or musty and wet. Those are all characteristics of hops that we're going to see in this particular style. You typically don't get very much on the malt side, and if you are, it's going to be more on the toast, cracker, bread crust note. You're not really going to get a lot of sweetness out of this particular style of beer. When you take a sip, if you pause in the moment as you're swallowing, you'll notice that it's really fast. And it's because of that extra little bit of bitterness and the remineralization that goes on when you're making IPAs. So you're actually adding more calcium magnesium salts into the wort before, or into your brewing water, so that it cleans it up and pronounces that nice crisp bitterness. So it's got a really, really quick finish, but it does have a longer aftertaste. So the aftertaste tends to sneak back up, and then it sits there. And the aftertaste right now, if you're thinking about it as you're drinking this beer with me, I want you to think about where the bitterness is, because it should be at the back of your tongue, in the roof of your mouth, along the jawline, and down your throat. And those are what we refer to as tannic bitterness. And tannins are a part of hops, so it is very natural to get that kind of bitterness. On the flavor profile, you're going to get a lot of what I already described. So the pink grapefruit, the pine, this is where the malts are really going to start to shine. You're going to get a little bit of that cracker, bread, depending on the style and who's making it, or the version of the style and who's making it. You might get little notes of honey, but it is not typical in this. This is it's a simple beer. They are wonderful beers to have with a lot of different things. If you want to have something if you like spice, IPAs are great with spice, because what they do is they blow it up and they transfer the spice from the tip of your tongue and your lips down into your throat. Great with dark chocolate as well. It's a really, really nice contrast with dark chocolate. It took me a long time to fall in love with IPAs, and I'm starting to. It's not something that I would go to on an ongoing basis, but there are times and days when I'm just looking for this. It's the right thing for me to have at that particular day. So let me give you a bit of background on it. So IPAs, as we know, as we've discussed in previous sessions, were developed in the 1700s as a way of getting beer down to India. And then the style basically died. So with the onset of Pilsners, more hop-forward beers took a back seat, and the style basically died to a point where we saw IPAs in the marketplace through the early 1900s, right up until the 1980s, where they were light golden in color, just like most Pilsners or Helleses are, and they had a little bit more hop content than the standard beers would have, but not enough to really classify it as an IPA. And then in 1983, all credit goes to one person named Burt Grant, who was at Yakima Brewing and Malting, who decided to use American hops in the production of his IPA. He wanted to bring the style back, and so the hops that he was using were Cascade, and probably Citrus, Chinook, whatever was available at that time. And those are the characteristics that we see so dominant in this style of beer. So when we're thinking about the development of this beer, and I'll go into a little bit more later on, we should thank Burt Grant and raise a glass to him. So a couple things that we want to talk about as we lead into our next set of style sessions, and that is, these beers are really heavily hopped, and IBUs typically are somewhere in the 60 to 80 range. I've heard reports that people go above that, but the scale really only goes to 100, and your mouth can only determine 80 IBUs. But I think a lot of brewers wanted to create the same style, but then lessen the impact of the hops, so make them a little less intense. And that's where this next generation of beers have come in. And I think a lot of people that are now going back to the old standard of West Coast, a lot of brewers are now bringing the hop levels down a bit and increasing the malt profile. So you still get that really nice pop of bitterness to it, but it's not overwhelming. So we're nearing the end. Next week is our final formal session of the style sessions, in which I will review a hazy IPA, and I'll give you a little bit of detail about that. And then I am asking for suggestions on styles if you'd like me to take a look at them. I've had a couple of suggestions already, and I have to figure out whether or not A, they're readily available, and B, whether they fit within the program itself. So if you want, send me your notes. You can find more out about beer education and Prud'homme beer certification as a whole at tfkbeer.com. Remember, if you love these sessions, let everybody know that you love them, have other people watch them, and then and we'll see you next week. Cheers.